Hello, musicians. Welcome to another episode of Explore Great Music with Ted. In this video, we'll study the score of the second movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony. We'll examine its ABA form, including a surprise interruption. We'll analyze the unusual chord progressions that begin and end the movement. Most importantly, we'll focus on the famous English horn melody and observe the subtle changes that Dvorak makes to the tune and its accompaniment each time it appears. So with that, let's explore the score. The second movement begins with a chorale in the brass. The unusual chord progression and modulation contribute to a haunting quality. The chorale opens on E major, the parallel major of the first movement, followed by a jarring B-flat major triad in first inversion. E major is next followed by D-flat major in root position, a third relation. Next follows an A major triad, and it is from this chord that Dvorak pivots towards an arrival on D-flat major, the key of this movement. This is neither the first nor the last time that an A major chord has an important role in this symphony. Note that the final D-flat major chord in the brass is followed by a roll in the timpani one beat later. Before moving on, let's note a couple of things about the orchestration that we can see on the first page. Just as with the piccolo in the first movement, Dvorak assumes that the English horn will be played by one of the two oboists. There are indications later in the score showing where the instruments are to be swapped. Since in today's world, English horn specialists live for this move, I doubt that any but the most authentic performances will give this over to one of the oboes. Similarly, Dvorak expects clarinets to switch between instruments in A for the sharp keys and B flat for the flat keys. Finally, the string sections play this movement entirely using mutes. On the next page, we see that PBD in the English horn is harmonized by the clarinets a third below. For PA prime C, the English horn is doubled by the bassoon an octave below. For this subphrase, there is a scale-wise descending motion in the cellos and basses, but notice that they linger on A flat, creating a superimposition of the subdominant above a dominant pedal. A two-measure extension follows completion of the melody where the clarinets echo the last fragment W and then repeat that in augmentation. Next, a D-flat major arpeggio, begun in the cellos and continued by the flutes, leads to a second appearance of the chorale, now in the upper register of the winds. This time, the chorale begins and ends in D-flat major, and the timpani roll occurs 2 beats after the final chord. The chorale gives way to a quiet D-flat major chord in the strings. This is P prime, but it is not strictly a variation of PA. Rather, it is a mixture of fragments X and V, followed by repetitions of V, then alternations of V with a new fragment, U. The unexpected insertion of a measure of 2/4 suggests that this attempt at a variation has run aground. Notice that in the following common time measure, D-flat gives way to a German augmented 6th chord. The augmented 6th here is used only for harmonic color. There is no traditional resolution, just an immediate return to the tonic. The English horn resumes the melody with A prime A. Notice the slight alteration of the melody on beat 3 of the second measure. For A prime C, the bassoon doubles the English horn as before. Also notice how the cellos and basses descend all the way to G flat below this, forming a pure plagal cadence here. The clarinets again initiate an extension, repeating fragment W. Then the violins play fragment W in augmentation. For the next four measures, the muted first and second horns play fragments X and Y and then trail off on fragment X only. Now begins the B section of this ABA form in C sharp minor, the parallel minor. The melody, S1, is played by the familiar combination of flute and oboe. S1 consists of four two-measure phrases, A, B, A, and C. The B phrase shows another inclination towards the natural minor. The final cadence of phrase C is 6-1, yet again an appearance of an A major chord. S2A is a five-measure phrase played by the first clarinet with harmony from the second clarinet and the oboes. There is a pizzicato walking bass in the basses that moves to a Neapolitan sixth in the second measure before finding its way back home with 4-2-5-1. The first violins have written out fingered tremolos, and the second violins punctuate the arrival on the tonic with two pizzicato quarter notes. S2B is played by the wind choir and is also a five-measure phrase. Harmonically, this phrase moves towards the median E major, and this is followed immediately by D major. File away in your mind this example of a drop by a whole step, and in particular, this one from E major to D major. S1A returns in the first violins, and this time the flute and oboe play a counter melody based on an inversion of the X motif. S1A repeats, building up to a dominant ninth chord of C sharp minor, which the first violins follow with a six-measure cadenza. Notice the échappé in the first violins, F double sharp to G sharp, above the dominant chord that ends the cadenza. S2A follows, again in the first violins, who are instructed to play this entire passage on the G string. Clarinets provide lugubrious harmony, while the cellos return to a walking bass, now marked tremolo. There is also very subtly and not easily heard orchestration here, where the violas have tremolos on beat 2, and the second violin's pizzicato on the last eighth of beats 2 and 4. What follows next defies traditional norms of formal analysis. Remember that we are in an ABA form. I'm simply labeling this passage an interruption, which starts with the first of two sections. Dvorak builds this section on top of drones, first in the cellos, then violas, then second violins. Above this, there are two separate one-measure themes. The first one, labeled M, is a sextuplet figure played by the oboe. The second one, labeled N, is a trilling figure played by the flute. These two themes migrate across different instruments for three measures, giving way to a series of fragments in the cellos and basses on the dominant of C sharp major. Section 2 of the interruption explodes with a deceptive cadence to A major in first inversion. Here are five measures of spectacular multiple counterpoint. P1A from the first movement is played by the trombones and tuba. PA from this movement is played by the trumpets. S2A from the first movement is played by the violins, and S2B from the first movement by the winds. Eventually, PA in the trumpets is reduced to fragment Y twice, and then fragment Y in augmentation. Meanwhile, even as the violins continue with S2A, The violas and cellos play X in alternation with the Y in the trumpets. The A prime section of our ABA form begins on the next page. The English horn plays a reprise of the entire PA phrase to the accompaniment of the strings, all in D-flat major. Note that Dvorak indicates that strings are reduced to 2 stands each. The B phrase is taken up by the strings, now with only a single stand in each section. This phrase seems to disintegrate into fragments and halts 3 times. The A prime phrase returns, now played by a string trio of violin, viola, and cello. Then the full string sections return for A prime C, ending with a cadence of 2 diminished 6/5 to 1. Introduced by arpeggios, each time the clarinets extend with fragment W twice, and this gives way to a melismatic cadenza in the first violins. The chorale is played for the 3rd and final time in the coda, with the trombones supported only by the bassoons and 2 horns. This subdued return of the chorale ends on D-flat major, where for the first time the accompany arrives with the rest of the brass on the final chord. Arpeggios in the cellos and violins end in the highest register on D-flat major, doubled by flutes and oboes. And if you are watching a live performance, be sure to turn your attention to the basses. If you can hear these final chords at all, you might not know where they're coming from. Well, musicians, there you have it. Having concluded our deep dive into the score of the 2nd movement of Dvorak's New World Symphony, we saw that it is in an ABA form, with the A sections in D-flat major and the B section in C-sharp minor. In the surprising interruption before the return of A, we encountered an example of triple counterpoint where Dvorak combined themes from the first movement with the main theme of this one. Finally, though the famous English horn melody sounds like a folk song, it originated with Dvorak, inspired by folk songs he may have heard during his time in the New World. As always, I'd love to hear from you, so please leave your thoughts and questions in the comments section. If you found the annotations helpful and enjoyed the commentary, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.